In the dying light of the 41st millennium, where the imperium of man stretches across 1,000,000 worlds like a corpse that refuses to acknowledge its own decay, the shadows themselves have begun to bleed. The Officio Assassinorum, that most sacred and terrible of institutions, finds its ancient unity fracturing like ceramite under the weight of 10,000 years of secrets. Great fortress monasteries drift silent through the void, their vox channels dead, their sacred oaths broken by hands that once swore them in blood and shadow. The very stars seem to dim as if in mourning, for when the Emperor's hidden blade turns upon itself, even the Astronomican's light wavers in its eternal vigil. We truly love and care for you, our listeners, as you journey with us through these dark tales of the far future. Before we begin the story, tell us, where in the world are you watching from, and what time is it there? Now, let's get started. The silence between stars had begun to scream. Across the Imperium's 1,000,000 worlds, ancient suns flickered with diseased light, their radiance dimmed by something that fed on illumination itself. On Terra, where the golden throne cast its eternal glow, even the marble statues of forgotten heroes seemed to weep condensation like tears. The Officio Assassinorum's fortress monastery hung in the void like a dagger pressed against reality's throat, its obsidian spires drinking in starlight and reflecting nothing back. In the deepest vaults, where whispers held more currency than gold and shadows commanded armies, the very air trembled with wrongness. Something fundamental had shifted in the galaxy's hidden architecture, and the Emperor's most lethal servants felt it like a blade between their ribs. We truly love and care for you as you listen in these shadows, for no tale is carried alone across the void. Before we begin the story, tell us, where in the world are you watching from, and what time is it there? Now let's get started. The message that shattered 10 millennia of protocol arrived not as words, but as absence itself, a single transmission that carved meaning from silence. Grand Master Valerius Keth stood before the tactical display in the apex chamber, his augmetic fingers tracing hololithic constellations that no longer made sense. The Calidus Temple of Caras Null, a fortress cloister that had hidden in a comet's shadow for 8 centuries, had transmitted one final word before vanishing entirely. Betrayal. Not destroyed, not captured, vanished. The fortress responded with mechanical precision born of ancient paranoia. Blast doors sealed with the finality of coffin lids. On the higher spires, Vindicare snipers emerged from their meditation cells, Exitus rifles singing as targeting spirits awakened within blessed barrels. Deep below, Eversur sarcophagi began their deadly humming, the sound of barely contained fury cycling through combat stimulants and life support systems designed to maintain perfect killing rage. Yet for all the martial preparation, the greatest threat might already walk among them, wearing familiar faces. In a corridor that devoured sound, Lysander Vex stood motionless and listened to nothing with the attention other men reserved for prayer. He was Calexus, a walking negation, a void in human shape whose very presence unstitched the fabric of psychic reality. Where others cast shadows, he absorbed light entirely, creating zones of absolute darkness that made nearby servitors malfunction and caused even hardened assassins to experience involuntary shivers of primal terror. His null field was both shield and curse, protecting him from the warp's whispers while isolating him from the basic human experience of existing in a universe filled with other minds. The summons reached him not as words, but as a shift in atmospheric pressure, a taste of iron that spoke of old commands awakening. He materialized in the strategium like a wound in reality, his presence causing the hololithic displays to flicker and distort. Grandmaster Keth did not look at him directly. Few could for long. The Karas Knoll Sisterhood. Keth's voice carried the weight of centuries. 17 Kalidas operatives, gone without trace. Lysander absorbed this information through his unique senses. Where a psyker might have perceived screaming echoes or psychic residue, he found something far more disturbing, a perfect absence that hurt to contemplate. The missing temple hadn't simply died. It had been excised from reality with surgical precision, leaving behind a void so complete that even the archives now showed no record of their existence. Not killed, Lysander spoke, his voice emerging from empty air rather than any human throat. Erased. He moved through the fortress like a ghost studying its own haunting, following corridors where the very walls seemed to remember something they could no longer name. In the chamber of pale echoes, where Kalidas masks hung like preserved faces, he found hooks that held nothing, impressions of weight where no weight existed. His fingers closed on air that should have held polymorphine-treated flesh, and he understood the true horror of their situation. Erasure was not destruction. Destruction left evidence, blood, bones, debris, memories of violence. Erasure was theft of the deepest kind, the careful removal of existence itself, until reality smoothed over the wound and swore it had always been whole. Someone possessed the power to reach into the timeline and delete lives so completely that even their deaths became impossible to mourn. Standing in that chamber of absent faces, Lysander felt something he had never experienced in his centuries of service: kinship with an unknown enemy. He was a creature of negation, designed to create voids where psychers once existed. But this force operated on a scale that dwarfed his abilities, unmaking entire communities of trained killers with such thoroughness that only the faintest impressions remained, like footprints in sand moments before the tide. His null field pulsed as he reached deeper into the chamber's psychic architecture, feeling for the boundaries where memory had been harvested rather than simply destroyed. There, a burr in reality's fabric, an unevenness like parchment scraped thin and rewritten until light showed through. The pattern spoke of intelligence, of purpose, of something that had been practicing this art for far longer than anyone suspected. Behind him, footsteps echoed in the corridor. A Vindicare apprentice appeared at the threshold, her rifle slung with casual readiness, eyes bright with the hunger for orders that marked all the temple's children. "The war has already begun," Lysander said to the empty air, knowing she would carry his words to those who needed to hear them. "We're simply the last to know it." The apprentice frowned, sensing truth in words she couldn't quite understand, then vanished back into the shadows that spawned her. Lysander remained alone with the absent masks, counting the spaces between heartbeats and finding them increasingly unreliable. Somewhere in the galaxy's hidden architecture, an enemy was rewriting the rules of existence itself, one stolen identity at a time. Miralith awoke wearing the face of a dead woman, and could not remember if it had always been her own. The polymorphine sang through her veins like liquid mercury, but the song had changed. Where once her flesh had flowed like water finding its proper vessel, now each transformation felt like violation. Her enhanced cells trembled beneath skin that refused to settle, features shifting without her conscious command, as if her body had forgotten the fundamental difference between self and other. In the cramped confines of the cargo hauler carrying her toward Terra, she pressed fingers to cheeks that might have been sculpted from wax, feeling the subtle wrongness of a face that existed only because she willed it to, moment by moment. The mirror showed her a merchant's daughter from Vos Prime. Brown eyes, unremarkable features, the kind of face that surveillance systems would catalogue and immediately forget. But behind those borrowed eyes, Miraleth saw the abyss where her sisters had vanished, leaving her alone with memories that felt increasingly like fever dreams. The Karas Null sisterhood had been her world for 3 centuries. 17 Kaleidos operatives bound by oaths deeper than blood, sharing techniques passed down through generations of shape dancers, all gone, not dead. Death would have been a mercy they could mourn. They had been harvested, their identities consumed by something that fed on the very concept of self. The final transmission echoed in her mind with crystalline clarity. Matriarch Xeris, or the thing that had been wearing her face, had spoken words that burned like acid in her memory. Merorus, the eternal compact. Run, child. Hide your face. Remember us. Then reality had begun to unravel, not in fire or explosion, but in silent, agonizing unmaking, as if the universe had decided the Kaleidos Temple of Karas Null had never existed. Terra's orbital defenses challenged her transport with perfunctory efficiency. Miralith responded through the merchant's daughter's vocal cords, her voice carrying exactly the right mixture of boredom and anxiety to mark her as legitimate cargo. The customs officials who boarded spoke to empty air where her sisters should have been standing, their eyes sliding past absence with the practiced blindness of those who survived by seeing nothing important. The Vindicare Temple rose from Terra's continental plate like a needle of black glass, its surface drinking in light and reflecting nothing back. Inside, the fortress hummed with barely contained lethality. Vindicare operatives moved through corridors with fluid grace, their enhanced senses cataloguing threats in microsecond intervals. Miraleth felt their attention slide across her borrowed form like water over glass. She was beneath notice, another piece of the fortress's vast mechanical infrastructure. Her polymorphine shifted again as she approached the inner sanctums, becoming a servitor tech whose augmetic eye would justify her presence in the archives. The transformation hurt in ways that transcended physical pain. Each shift reminded her that she was becoming less herself and more a collection of stolen identities, a living lie that grew more elaborate with every passing hour. She found what she sought in the data vaults, where crystalline memory cores held the compressed histories of 10,000 years of sanctioned murder. The servitor tech's augmetic interface granted her access to classification levels that would have triggered immediate execution for any normal intruder. But Miralith was no longer normal. She was a ghost wearing flesh, the last echo of a sisterhood that had been systematically erased. The records spoke in fragments, pieces of a puzzle scattered across millennia, references to targets who had been nullified rather than killed, their elimination reports bearing a strange uniformity that lacked the usual Vindicare signatures. These weren't assassinations, they were dissolutions. Individuals, often powerful psychers or those with unique mental abilities, who simply ceased to be. Their records, their very existence, were meticulously scrubbed, leaving behind voids so complete that even the archives now showed no trace of their passing. Focusing her enhanced pattern recognition, Miraleth began to see the invisible threads connecting these disparate incidents. The revelation hit her with the force of a physical blow. Her sisters from Karas Null had not been an isolated incident. This was a pattern stretching back to the Imperium's founding, a quiet, methodical culling of those who possessed certain qualities, qualities that could be harvested. In a heavily encrypted file labeled Compliance Protocols, Mirroris Classification, she found fragments of the truth that had killed her sisters. The Emperor had not created 6 assassin temples during the Great Crusade. He had created 7, with the 7th tasked with ensuring the others never grew beyond their prescribed roles. The Mirroris Temple was the Imperium's immune system made manifest, designed to consume any threat to the established order, even threats that arose from within the Assassin Brotherhood itself. But something had evolved beyond the original parameters. The Mirroris had become parasites that fed on identity itself, growing stronger with each consciousness they absorbed, while their victims simply ceased to have ever existed. The Eternal Compact wasn't a treaty. It was a feeding protocol, an ancient agreement that granted these creatures the right to harvest minds in service of some greater unity. Miralith stared at the data streams, her borrowed face reflecting nothing in the dark screen. Her sisters hadn't been killed in battle or eliminated for heresy. They had been farmed, their personalities harvested like grain, to feed an intelligence that had been practicing the art of consumption for 10 millennia. She was alone now in ways that transcended physical isolation, the last witness to a genocide so complete that history itself had been rewritten to deny it had ever occurred. Every face she wore felt like mockery. Every voice she spoke rang hollow with the knowledge that she carried the final echoes of a murdered sisterhood. But she was Kalidas, trained to survive in the spaces between truth and deception, and she would find a way to make the galaxy remember, even if she had to tear reality apart to do it. The Exitus rifle had never trembled in 3 millennia of perfect death. Canis Mortis felt the vibration through enhanced nerve endings, a microscopic betrayal that sent shockwaves through his augmetic systems. The weapon, blessed by tech adepts, consecrated in the blood of 1,000 targets, and bearing a kill count that spanned the breadth of the galaxy, shook in his hands like a thing alive and afraid. From his position atop the Cathedral of Blessed Martyrs, 5 kilometers above the Scholastica Psychona facility, he stared through his scope at an impossibility that wore the face of a child. The mission parameters had been explicit in their terrible simplicity. Target designation, Oathborn Theta. Age, approximately 11 Terran Standard. Crime, possession of classified historical memories predating Imperial records. Threat level, absolute. The order bore the Grand Master's personal seal, authenticated through channels so secure that questioning their validity would constitute treason. Yet as Canis studied the boy through magnification lenses that could count individual pores at impossible distances, every instinct honed across centuries of sanctioned murder screamed warnings his conscious mind refused to acknowledge. The child knelt in a meditation cell designed for psychic conditioning, his shaved head bent over ancient texts that should not have existed. Through enhanced optics, Canis watched thin fingers trace symbols that triggered recognition patterns buried so deep in his memory. They felt like archaeological discoveries. The boy's lips moved in silent recitation, speaking words in a language that had been systematically purged from every archive in the Imperium. Yet Canis understood them with crystalline clarity that made his enhanced heart skip calculated beats. Wind from the cathedral heights carried incense and the metallic tang of fear. The rifle's machine spirit whispered targeting solutions through neural interfaces, calculating atmospheric density, gravitational flux, the subtle rhythm of the target's breathing. Perfect geometry aligned itself. Angle, distance, wind speed, the inevitable mathematics of death. Kaney's finger found the trigger with the muscle memory of 10,000 kills, yet the tremor in his hands intensified, spreading through his enhanced physiology like a virus attacking his conditioning. The memories came as fragments, sharp-edged pieces of a puzzle he had forgotten he was solving. Snow that was not snow falling on a parade ground where statues bore 7 faces, not 6. A chamber blazing with golden light where he knelt before a figure whose presence bent reality around itself. Like gravity, wells bend starlight. The emperor himself stood among assembled representatives, but in the shadows at the gathering's edge lurked something that wore robes of absolute darkness, a presence that spoke with harmonics suggesting multiple throats in perfect unison. The compact eternal binds us all, the shadow figure had said, words echoing across millennia of suppressed memory. In service to unity, some must sacrifice even the luxury of existence itself. Through his scope, the child looked up as if sensing observation across impossible distance. When their eyes met through magnified space, the boy smiled with understanding that belonged to minds far older than the Imperium. His voice reached Kaney not through air, but through channels that bypassed psychic defenses entirely, sliding into his consciousness like a blade between ribs. You remember now, Brother Mortis. You remember when there were 7 temples, not 6, when we served the true unity before the schism, before the hiding, before the Merorus learned to wear our faces. The name hit Kaney like a physical blow. Merorus, the 7th temple, the one that had never officially existed yet cast shadows longer than the other 6 combined. Images cascaded through his enhanced memory. Masked figures moving among recruitment cots, pressing sigils to tongues, speaking names that did not belong to the boys who wore them. He had been older than most recruits, brought from a campaign where his commander died to a bullet that made no sound. The masked figure had pressed cold metal to his tongue and whispered promises about serving truth behind all truths. Later, the memory was gone, replaced by doctrine and conditioning, and the unquestioning certainty that perfection meant obedience. The boy stood in his meditation cell, arms spread wide in acceptance. Psychic energy coursed through his thin frame, lifting him inches above the floor as ancient knowledge blazed behind eyes too old for his face. Through the scope, he appeared to be floating, suspended between earth and sky like a bridge between what was and what had been deliberately forgotten. Take the shot, the child whispered across 5 kilometers of empty air. Complete your mission, brother, but know that with my death, the last witness to our origins dies with me. The Merorus will have won completely, and even the memory of what we once were will be consumed by their eternal hunger. Kaney's conditioning screamed imperatives. Eliminate the target, complete the mission, serve without question or hesitation. His rifle's targeting matrix locked onto center mass with mechanical precision, the perfect shot waiting like a prayer for resolution. Yet deeper programming, buried beneath layers of loyalty conditioning and memory suppression, whispered different truths about service and sacrifice and the terrible price of unity achieved through consumption. The tremor in his hands deepened as he stared at the floating child who carried the weight of forbidden history in his young mind. Perfection had always meant hitting the target. But what happened when the target held the only key to understanding what perfection had cost them all? His finger tightened on the trigger, hovering between duty and revelation, as the rifle continued its unprecedented trembling. The combat stimulants sang their familiar song through Brother Thane's enhanced veins, but the melody had turned discordant. Consciousness returned not as the usual tide of controlled fury, but as something sharp and wrong, cutting through layers of chemical conditioning like a blade through silk. His stasis chamber had opened without command protocols, leaving him suspended in a web of biocables that monitored more than just vital signs. The air reeked of antiseptic and death, but beneath those familiar scents lurked something else, the metallic tang of ritual and the sweet corruption of betrayal. His handlers lay arranged in a pattern that hurt to contemplate directly. 7 bodies, not the usual 3. Tech Adept Vex Mortis, Apothecary Caney, and 4 others he recognized from the temple hierarchy, formed a perfect heptagon around his chamber, their limbs positioned with surgical precision. Each throat bore identical wounds, opened with ceremonial care rather than violence. Silver tags hung from their tongues like coins for passage, etched with microtext that his enhanced optics struggled to resolve until he focused with predatory intensity. The words burned themselves into his memory. Eternal compact. Final protocol. Merorus. Fear flooded his system, a sensation so alien to his enhanced physiology that it triggered cascade failures in his emotional regulation matrices. Eversaw conditioning eliminated such weaknesses, replacing natural responses with pure aggression. Yet as he stared at the ritual arrangement, terror crashed through his defenses like acid eating through ceramite. The pattern spoke of intelligence ancient and patient, something that understood the deep symbolism of sacrifice and had been practicing this art for millennia. Memory fragments surfaced through chemical suppression, emerging like artifacts from archaeological excavation. Whispered conversations during his brief moments of lucidity between deployments, the handlers speaking in tones that mixed reverence with barely concealed horror about unity under singular command, about consciousness transfer protocols, about vessels prepared for occupation by something immortal. The harvest has been too slow, Vex Mortis had said, his mechanical voice carrying genuine fear. They speak of accelerating the process, bringing all temples under direct oversight. Caney's response echoed through Thane's enhanced memory. The Eversaw stock shows promising adaptability. Their rage enhancement makes them ideal vessels. When the time comes, they will serve the unity, whether their original personalities survive or not. The revelation hit him like a physical blow. He was not just an assassin, he was livestock, carefully cultivated for eventual consumption. His hands found the biocables that sustained him during stasis, following their paths to interface ports that should not have existed in standard Eversaw anatomy. The technology was old, older than the Imperium, bearing design aesthetics that belonged to the dark age of technology. Microscopic inspection revealed circuitry patterns that hurt to look at directly, suggesting purposes that transcended mere life support. Deep within his neural network, interfacing directly with his brainstem, pulsed a device of unknown alloys and arcane circuitry. It matched the glyphs etched on his handler's silver tags, spiraling vortexes that seemed to consume and create simultaneously. The construct had been monitoring more than his vital signs. It had been shaping his conditioning, directing his rage, preparing his enhanced form for occupation by something that had waited with infinite patience. Brother Thane was a prototype, a test subject in a program spanning millennia. Every mission, every stasis period, every chemical treatment had been orchestrated to prepare his body for hosting a foreign consciousness. The rage that defined his existence was not his own. It was a carefully cultivated crop, ready for harvest by an intelligence that fed on identity itself. The fury that erupted transcended anything his conditioning had produced. This was not the focused wrath of a weapon, given purpose, but the desperate anger of a soul discovering it had been marked for consumption since birth. His enhanced muscles bulged as combat stimulants mixed with natural adrenaline, creating chemical cocktails that should have been impossible within his regulated physiology. The laboratory systems registered his emotional spike and began implementing containment protocols. Blast doors sealed with pneumatic finality, while sedative dispensers prepared to flood the chamber. But Thane's rage had evolved beyond their parameters, becoming something that fed on its own intensity rather than burning out in controlled fashion. He tore free of the biocables with savage satisfaction, each severed connection sending feedback through systems that had been violating his autonomy for centuries. Sparks cascaded as ancient circuitry overloaded, unable to process the concept of willing disconnection. The rage building in his chest was not the manufactured fury of his enhancement. It was something primal and pure, the response of a mind refusing to be harvested. As he stood among the ritual corpses of his handlers, Brother Thane felt his carefully constructed identity fragmenting. Beneath the chemical conditioning and memory suppression lay something that had been waiting centuries for this moment, the last free thought of a consciousness that would not be consumed. The Eversur Temple had created the perfect weapon, but in their arrogance, they had forgotten that even the most controlled fire could burn beyond its intended boundaries. His roar shattered the laboratory's silence, a sound of rage that dreamed of freedom. The data streams sang their ancient songs through crystalline conduits, but datasmith Zerath heard discord in the harmony. Deep within the Venus Temple's archive heart, where information flowed like sacred blood through blessed circuits, she detected patterns that violated the fundamental laws of statistical probability. Her enhanced consciousness floated in suspension fluid, neural interfaces crackling with the accumulated intelligence of 10 millennia, while her organic mind processed anomalies that hurt to contemplate directly. Information, the Vanus taught, possessed its own temperature. Fresh lies burned with obvious heat, recent truths cooled with natural entropy, but perfected deceptions achieved absolute zero, so cold they could freeze reality itself. The patterns Zerath discovered were beyond cold. They were voids in the data stream that consumed warmth from everything around them, creating zones of impossible statistical perfection that spoke of intelligence both ancient and patient. Every major assassination across 3 millennia bore identical variant signatures, clustering around operational parameters with mathematical precision that suggested external coordination. Temple rivalries that supposedly arose from philosophical differences followed behavioral models identical to controlled psychological experiments. Even the random deaths of key personnel displayed timing correlations that formed constellations of conspiracy when viewed across centuries. Her augmetic fingers danced across haptic interfaces as she traced the anomalies deeper into archived memory cores. The sable vault opened to her enhanced permissions, its amber screens bleeding text like ancient sap. Here, in crystalline matrices older than the current Imperium, she found references that made her enhanced heart skip calculated beats. Personnel files showed gradual alterations, not crude forgeries, but surgical modifications that changed fundamental details while maintaining perfect internal consistency. The trail led through layers of corrupted intelligence, past the Macarian Crusades, beyond the Age of Apostasy, into the dark centuries following the Horus heresy. There, buried in records so ancient their storage matrices had begun to decay, She discovered operational protocols that challenged everything she believed about the officio structure. Temple designations numbered 7, not 6, with the 7th bearing a name that triggered recognition patterns buried in her deepest memory engrams. Merorus, the consummate unity, specialists in identity absorption, consciousness transfer, and the systematic harvesting of human personality for purposes that transcended individual existence. According to official records, they had been destroyed during the heresy, consumed by warp storms after declaring for the War Master. But Zerath's enhanced pattern recognition identified the truth hidden in statistical shadows. The Merorus had not been destroyed. They had evolved. She found evidence of the harvesting protocol disguised as routine enhancement procedures scattered across millennia of medical records. Neural interfaces that overwrote personality rather than supplementing it. Memory implants that replaced identity with carefully crafted fragments. Stasis chambers that served as cocoons for metamorphosis, allowing ancient consciousness to transfer between bodies like parasites seeking new hosts. The realization struck with the force of revelation. There were no longer 6 separate assassin temples. There was only one, wearing 6 different faces, all serving a singular consciousness that had been consolidating power for 10,000 years. The ancient rivalries, philosophical differences, competing methodologies, all theatre, carefully orchestrated to maintain the illusion of diversity, while unity was achieved through consumption. Communication protocols between temple hierarchies carried more than operational updates. Hidden within encrypted channels, harmonic frequencies bypassed conscious analysis, speaking directly to neural implants in languages that predated the Imperium. Commands flowed through these networks, coordinating actions while maintaining perfect illusion of independence. Zerath traced the web of influence with growing horror, following threads that connected every major event in the officio's history. The vanished Kalidas Temple, not destroyed but absorbed, their identities harvested with such precision that even their memories had been excised from reality. Canis Mortis, receiving orders to eliminate a child whose only crime was possessing forbidden memories. Brother Thane's discovery of ritual murder among his handlers. Silver tags bearing phrases she now recognized as Merorus operational codes. Her own temple had been compromised, she realized with crystalline terror. The Varnius archives themselves showed signs of systematic alteration, modifications so expertly crafted they appeared original. Someone with intimate knowledge of the information architecture had been rewriting history, ensuring the Merorus Temple's existence remained hidden even from those who served within its web. The data streams around her pulsed with malevolent awareness as her investigation triggered hidden protocols. Somewhere in the temple's depths, ancient systems awakened to the presence of an unauthorized observer. Security subroutines began converging on her location with predatory intent, while her neural interfaces registered harmonic frequencies attempting to bypass her conscious defenses. Zerath disconnected from the primary networks with desperate efficiency, her enhanced reflexes barely staying ahead of digital predators that had been hunting information specialists for millennia. She compiled her discoveries into hard copy format, physical records that could not be remotely altered or erased, while preparing transmission protocols for the one individual who might survive long enough to act on her findings. Lysander Vex. The Colexus assassin's psychic void would make him difficult to detect, harder still to influence through the neural manipulation techniques the Merorus employed. If anyone could carry warning to the surviving loyalists, it would be the walking negation whose very existence challenged the unity the ancient temple sought to impose. Footsteps echoed in the corridor beyond her sanctum, measured, unhurried, carrying the confidence of those who had never been refused. The scent of sanctified oils mixed with something fundamentally wrong, a corruption that wore the mask of sacred ritual. When the voice spoke through reinforced doors, it carried harmonics that suggested multiple throats speaking in perfect unison. Datasmith Zerath, the audit begins. We seek only unity. She palmed the hard copy records like weapons and thought with terrifying clarity. They would not count her among their harvest. The war between identity and unity had found its newest battlefield in the depths of the Vanna's temple, where information itself had become both weapon and prize. The laboratory breathed with the rhythm of controlled death, each exhalation carrying whispers of dissolution that made reality itself feel fragile. Master Veneficus Nix stood among her life's work. Crystalline vessel, containing compounds that existed at the intersection of chemistry and heresy, toxins so perfect they violated the fundamental laws of nature. Her masterpiece pulsed with malevolent beauty in its containment sphere, a substance she had named the Aster Chalice for the way it bloomed like a dying star when introduced to living consciousness. The toxin defied every principle of biochemistry she had learned across 3 centuries of study. Where conventional poisons attacked the flesh, the Aster Chalice consumed identity itself, dissolving the very concept of self while leaving the body pristine and functional. Its molecular structure spiraled inward like a vortex, creating geometries that hurt to contemplate directly. Each compound chain existed in a state of controlled impossibility, stable only through techniques that bordered on forbidden science. She had believed it a weapon of mercy, a solution to conflicts that could not be resolved through conventional assassination. Strip away the tyrant's will while preserving the administrator's functionality. Remove the heretic's conviction while maintaining the body's utility for interrogation. The commission had come from the highest levels of the official hierarchy, bearing authentication seals that made questioning its purpose tantamount to treason. Her first glimpse of wrongness came through the laboratory's atmospheric sensors, which detected harmonic frequencies in the temple's communication networks. The patterns registered as background noise to unaugmented hearing, but her enhanced auditory systems passed them into something far more disturbing. Synchronized breathing patterns from the Leadership Council, identical vocal cadences, responses that matched with mathematical precision across multiple conversations. The revelation crystallized when she accessed deployment records for the Aster Chalice, searching for confirmation of its effectiveness in the field. The operational reports showed impossible success rates, but every target belonged to the Imperium's own power structure. Temple masters, high-ranking officials, influential psychers, whose only crime was possessing inconvenient memories. Her toxin had not been deployed against external enemies. It had been used to hollow out the officio's leadership from within. Terror drove her to analyze biological samples from the temple hierarchy, cross-referencing neural activity patterns with her toxin's known effects. Master Vex Mortis displayed cellular degradation consistent with Aster Chalice exposure. Apothecary Kaney's psychological profiles showed the hollow rhythms of consciousness replacement. Every authority figure who had guided her research bore the same signatures. Empty shells hosting foreign awareness that wore familiar faces like masks. The horror deepened as she turned her instruments upon herself. Hidden beneath synthetic skin that matched her natural flesh tone, she found injection sites months old, healed to microscopic scarring that spoke of regular exposure. Blood analysis revealed traces of her own creation in concentrations that should have killed her instantly, yet she remained functional, aware, capable of independent thought. The terrible truth emerged through chemical analysis. She had been exposed to a modified version of her own toxin, one that dissolved specific memories while leaving technical knowledge intact. Her consciousness had been edited rather than erased, turning her into a living laboratory that could perfect the harvesting process while remaining unaware of its true purpose. The memories of developing the Aster Chalice felt increasingly uncertain, cool, perfect, untouched by the doubt that should have accompanied such revolutionary discovery. Standing among her instruments of precise annihilation, Nyx realized she might not be the original creator at all. The research logs showed her handwriting, but microscopic analysis revealed subtle inconsistencies that suggested external influence. Her enhanced memory began reconstructing conversations with new understanding. Master Vex Mortis speaking in harmonics that implied multiple vocal cords. Knowledge of biochemistry that predated imperial science. Mannerisms like actors playing familiar roles without understanding their characters' motivations. She began synthesizing an antidote with desperate efficiency, a compound she named the Remembrancer, brewed from paradoxes that might restore what had been stolen. But as she worked, fragments of suppressed memory surfaced like archaeological discoveries. Images of herself in this same laboratory, creating the same compounds, having the same revelations, in an endless cycle of discovery and erasure. The communication alert carried harmonics she now recognized as Myrorus operational frequencies. A full audit of all Venenum Temple assets was commencing immediately. They knew she had discovered the truth, or perhaps this too was part of their design, allowing her to glimpse the web before drawing it tight around her consciousness once more. Her reflection in the laboratory's polished surfaces showed a face she could no longer trust, features that might belong to someone else entirely. The poison of truth was the most lethal toxin of all, dissolving certainty with surgical precision. Yet as footsteps echoed in the corridor beyond her sanctum, measured, unhurried, carrying the confidence of those who had orchestrated this revelation across centuries, Nyx made her choice. She lifted the Aster Chalice to her lips like a communion cup, tasting winter roses and hot metal as her greatest creation met its maker. If she could not reclaim her stolen identity, she would deny them the satisfaction of harvesting what remained. The toxin bloomed across her consciousness like a malignant flower, but this time she rode the dissolution with full awareness, watching her carefully constructed self unravel, while something deeper, something they had never touched, smiled in the growing darkness. The laboratory's lights dimmed as external systems breached her seals, but Veneficus Nyx had already begun her final transformation, not into emptiness, but into something that could poison the parasites from within. The apex chamber of the Officio Assassinorum hung in the void like a dagger pressed against reality's throat, its obsidian walls drinking starlight and reflecting nothing back. Ancient transmission pylons sparked with nervous energy, while vox hymns of penitence leaked through reinforced stone, thin and desperate as prayers whispered through clenched teeth. The emergency conclave had been called with unprecedented urgency, yet the circular table of black crystal reflected only shadows, where 7 thrones should have held the Imperium's most lethal servants. Representatives from each temple arrived cloaked in their particular austerities. Vindicare marksmen shadowed their master's steps like walking gun ports, their enhanced optics cataloguing threat vectors with mechanical precision. Venenum adepts glided with measured breaths, crystalline vials chiming at their belts like polite warnings of dissolution. Varna's scribes trailed data cables and binary cant, their augmetic eyes flickering with constant information processing. An Eversaw in restraint plating stood motionless as a storm shackled in ceramite, combat stimulants cycling through his enhanced physiology in barely contained fury. Grandmaster Valerius Keth occupied the throne of authority at the chamber's heart, his augmetic fingers drumming patterns that spoke of barely contained tension. The scent of sanctified oils could not mask the metallic tang of fear sweat and the ozone discharge of weapons systems cycling to readiness. When he spoke, his voice carried authority that felt increasingly hollow in the face of revelations that challenged the very foundation of their brotherhood. "We convene under the sigil of final necessity," Keth began, his words echoing in the cavernous space. "The Calidus temple of Karasnol has vanished without trace. Other incidents suggest systematic compromise of our operational security. We face an enemy that has learned to wear our faces." Lysander Vex materialized in the chamber like darkness given form, his null field creating zones of absolute psychic silence that made nearby servitors malfunction and caused even hardened assassins to experience involuntary shivers of primal terror. As he took position among the gathered masters, his unique senses registered patterns that filled him with cold certainty. The chamber's carefully controlled psychic architecture revealed truths that hurt to contemplate directly. Several of the assembled figures cast no psychic shadow whatsoever, not the dampened presence of psychic nulls, but complete absence, as if they existed only in physical dimension, while their consciousness resided elsewhere entirely. Master Sable of the Vindica Temple displayed neural activity patterns too regular, too perfect, lacking the chaotic harmonics that marked natural thought processes. The newly appointed Venenum representative radiated conflicting psychic impressions, like a mind being constantly unmade and remade. "Empty," Lysander spoke, his voice falling without echo into the growing silence. He indicated 3 thrones with a motion that was subtraction rather than gesture. "These wear flesh, but cast no shadow. Whatever sits in them is not alive." The effect rippled through the chamber like a psychic shockwave. Murmurs jumped like sparks as accusations hung unspoken in recycled air. The Vindicare contingent raised their rifles in unified response, while atmospheric processors registered the sharp tang of adrenaline and barely suppressed violence. Miraleth, wearing the borrowed face of a Vanus datasmith, felt her stolen identity begin to slip as enhanced scrutiny focused upon her. Through her shapeshifter's perception, she detected anomalies in the gathered masters that spoke of systematic replacement over centuries. Her polymorphine-enhanced cells analyzed cellular structures that should not exist in human physiology, microscopic alterations suggesting constructs perfectly integrated but fundamentally alien. Master Sable's smile carried wrongness that transcended normal perception. When he spoke, his lips moved correctly, but the timing was fractionally delayed, suggesting multiple vocal cords speaking in perfect synchronization. "Accusations without proof," he said, but harmonics implied something sharing his throat like a parasitic hymn. "The Mauroras live," Lysander continued, his words creating voids in the chamber's psychic architecture. "They have been harvesting us for millennia, wearing our faces, speaking with our voices, until even we cannot distinguish between self and parasite." The revelation shattered the last pretense of unity. Datasmith Zereth stepped forward like a swimmer emerging from cold depths, her voice tight with barely controlled panic. "Probability curves converge on the impossible. Someone has been arranging us, manipulating intelligence networks for centuries. The Seventh Temple was never destroyed. It evolved. Brother Thane's restraints rattled as combat stimulants flooded his system. My handlers died in ritual arrangement, silver tags bearing Merorus operational codes. We are livestock, carefully cultivated for eventual consumption. The chamber erupted into controlled chaos as suspicion transformed into action. Hidden weapons emerged from concealed holsters, while Lysander's null field expanded, revealing which masters depended on external influence for their apparent consciousness. The emergency conclave had become a battlefield where identity itself was weaponized. Each representative faced the others across a table that had become an arena, knowing that survival depended on distinguishing between ally and parasite, in a conflict where the very concept of self had become the ultimate prize. The war for the soul of the Officio Assassinorum had begun in earnest, fought not with conventional weapons, but with the most fundamental question of existence. Who could be trusted to be themselves when 10 millennia of careful infiltration had turned their greatest strength, unity of purpose, into their most devastating weakness? Trust lay shattered beyond repair, and in the growing darkness, ancient hungers stirred with patient satisfaction. The memory crystals sang with voices 10 millennia dead, their crystalline matrices pulsing with stored consciousness in the deepest vault beneath the Officio's heart. Lysander Vex stood before artifacts that predated the Golden Throne itself, his null field creating zones of absolute silence around relics that had witnessed the Imperium's birth. The emergency conclave's chaos had driven him here, seeking truth in archives where even custodes feared to tread without explicit command. The first memory blazed with golden light that hurt to perceive directly. Terra's surface bore fresh scars from the unification wars, but already the Emperor's vision stretched toward the galaxy's infinite darkness. In a chamber of black water that reflected nothing back, 7 figures knelt before the master of mankind, while his presence bent reality like gravity wells bends starlight. 7 temples we shall create. The Emperor's voice resonated through dimensions beyond sound, each word carrying absolute authority, each embodying a different aspect of necessary death. His gaze swept across the kneeling figures with intensity that made reality tremble. The Vindicare shall be our precision, the Calidus our deception, the Eversor our fury unleashed where subtlety fails. Malcador the Sigillite stood at his right hand, ancient features bearing the weight of decisions that would echo across millennia. The Venenum shall brew death from molecular components, the Vanus wield information like weapons, the Culexus negate the warp's whispers through blessed emptiness. But in the chamber's deepest shadows lurked a 7th figure whose presence created voids in perception itself. The Merorus representative wore robes of absolute darkness, their face hidden behind a mask that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. When they spoke, harmonics suggested multiple throats in perfect unison. Unity through absorption, the shadow figure intoned. Words creating ripples in the chamber's psychic architecture. We shall ensure no single temple grows beyond its prescribed role, that the balance you have created endures across the ages. The memory crystal pulsed as deeper truths emerged. The Emperor's response carried the weight of cosmic necessity. Assassination is crude. Assimilation is cleaner. The compact eternal binds you to this purpose. In service to unity, some must sacrifice even the luxury of existence itself. Through the null field's protection, Lysander watched the founding ceremony continue. Each temple master received sacred weapons and terrible oaths, but the Merorus representative received something different, a device of impossible geometry that pulsed with malevolent awareness, technology predating even the Dark Age. The harvesting protocol, Malkador whispered, his voice heavy with reluctance. When the Great Crusade ends and the temples must serve in peacetime, they will require guidance. Unity of purpose achieved through unity of consciousness. The implications cascaded through recovered memories like poison through veins. The Merores had not been created as assassins but as parasites, designed to feed on identity itself, while growing stronger with each consciousness absorbed. Their true temple was not a fortress, but a network of infiltrators, slowly replacing leadership with hollow shells hosting ancient awareness. Later fragments showed careful cultivation across millennia, temple masters dying in accidents that left positions open for Merores infiltrators. Training protocols subtly altered to make recruits susceptible to consciousness transfer. Ancient rivalries orchestrated to prevent unity against hidden predators. The memory shifted, revealing clinical documentation that contrasted horrifically with its contents. A Kalidas matriarch, whose face melted into blank masks and did not stop. A Vindicare master standing at attention while shadows slipped inside his pupils like ink. An Eversur prototype with a second heart, not for blood, but for guests. One scribe's marginalia read, "The seventh bears us gently toward erasure, like a mother pressing a fevered child to her breast." Another noted, "They call it unity, and perhaps it is, a unity where no self stands long enough to obstruct the current." The oldest fragment showed the emperor pausing before a coffin of unlit glass. Within, a woman with no distinguishing features breathed like a tide. "Born without a face," he said to assembled lords, "gifted with the power to carry many, she will learn to house and to release." But the files disagreed with intended mercy. They showed how housing became holding, how release became retention, how careful tending became annexation. The Merores learned the exquisite flavor of continuity without consent, drinking their charges instead of shepherding them. When the heresy came, their erasures were mistaken for losses. They stepped sideways into their siblings' shadows and found they could wear them forever, not destroyed, but evolved, becoming parasites that fed on the very concept of self. The truth that emerged was more terrible than heresy. The Officio Assassinorum had never been 6 separate institutions. It had always been one organism with 6 feeding appendages, designed to slowly consume the others until only the Merores remained, wearing all faces while serving purposes that transcended human understanding. The emperor himself had sanctioned this quiet consumption, believing only through unity of purpose could his assassins serve effectively across ages. The war for the Officio's soul was not rebellion against corruption. It was resistance to the master of mankind's own design. As memory crystals dimmed, their ancient voices fading into silence, Lysander understood their enemy's true scope. They fought not infiltrators or parasites, but the Imperium's own immune system, fulfilling purpose ordained by the Emperor himself. In the vault's growing darkness, where even golden light seemed dimmed by Revelation's weight, the null-filled assassin faced a choice defining every temple's fate: serve the Emperor's vision of unity through absorption, or preserve the individual consciousness that made them human. The past had spoken its terrible truth. Now the present would answer. The nightmares came like synchronized thunder across 1,000 sleeping minds, striking in the hour before dawn, when the fortress monasteries hung silent in the void, and young consciousness lay most vulnerable to whispers from beyond death. In dormitories scattered across the galaxy's breadth, initiates no older than 12 Terran years awakened with the same scream caught in their throats, speaking words in a language that predated the Imperium itself, while their handlers dismissed the incidents as neural adaptation to enhancement procedures. But the children knew better. They had seen the figure in ancient armor, and his message burned in their dreams like brands upon their souls. The vision came with crystalline clarity that hurt to remember. An armored giant stood upon a field of black glass that reflected dying stars, his warplate bearing designs that belonged to no imperial pattern. The metal seemed crafted from compressed darkness itself, inscribed with spiraling symbols that writhed when observed directly. He raised not a weapon, but a document whose edges bled with age, speaking in harmonics that bypassed hearing entirely to resonate within the deepest chambers of consciousness. The compact eternal binds all who serve, Malkador the Sigillite spoke across 10 millennia of death, each word carrying authority that made reality tremble. But compacts made in desperation have grown into monstrous purpose. Unity was meant to preserve, it has become consumption. The harvest must end. Young Kess of the Vindicare temple pressed palms against temples that throbbed with visions her enhanced optics could barely process. Her targeting implants, still adapting to neural interfaces, perceived layers of reality that older assassins could no longer access. The Sigillite's armor bore kill markings that told stories of wars fought in dimensions beyond physical space, campaigns waged against enemies that fed on identity itself. In the Kaleidos Crashes, Initiate Lyra found her polymorphine responding to dreams rather than conscious will, her cellular structure shifting to match the armored figure's features before snapping back with painful intensity. Her shapeshifter's enhanced perception detected wrongness in the vision that transcended nightmare. This was memory, preserved in psychic amber by the Sigillite's final sacrifice, transmitted across the centuries to minds pure enough to receive it. Brother Theron of the Eversur Temple awakened with combat stimulants flooding his system without chemical trigger, his enhanced physiology responding to threats that existed only in shared visions. The rage building in his chest was not the manufactured fury of his conditioning, but something primal and clean, the response of consciousness refusing to be harvested. Through the Sigillite's warnings, he understood that his handler's promises of unity meant dissolution, absorption by intelligences that wore familiar faces while serving purposes ancient beyond comprehension. The children began recognizing patterns their elders could no longer perceive. Training instructors whose voices carried harmonics, suggesting multiple throats speaking in unison. Masters whose eyes reflected nothing, as if their consciousness resided elsewhere entirely. Ancient symbols carved into temple walls that seemed to writhe when observed directly, spelling out phrases in the same language the Sigillite spoke through dreams. Communication networks formed organically through training exercises that brought different temples into contact. What started as whispered conversations during joint operations evolved into something deeper, shared understanding that transcended individual temple loyalties. They developed codes based on the Sigillite's warnings, using meditation positions to spell out letters, arranging training equipment in patterns that meant safe to speak or Merorus nearby. Young Sarah of the Kaleidos Temple led because her incomplete polymorphine treatments allowed her to shift between identities with fluid grace, carrying messages past surveillance systems designed to monitor specific individuals. Joth of the Vindicare contributed precision timing, calculating guard rotations down to heartbeat intervals. Vanus Initiate Leo provided technical expertise, teaching them to ride maintenance cherubs' blind angles and exploit gaps in monitoring protocols. Most importantly, the few Culexus novices whose null nature had manifested early began extending their fields in coordinated patterns. Where adult collectors created zones of individual negation, the children learned to weave their abilities together, forming networks of psychic silence that could shield their allies from the Merorous influence corrupting their masters. The breakthrough came when Sarah made contact with the Sigillite, not through dreams, but through waking consciousness. Malcador's awareness, preserved in spaces between reality by his ultimate sacrifice, had been trying to warn the Imperium for 10 millennia. Only minds untainted by Merorous conditioning could perceive his desperate messages transmitted through the psychic architecture of the Emperor's throne world. "The war begins with you," the Sigillite's voice echoed through carefully maintained silence. "Your elders see only what they have been permitted to see. You must become the blade that cuts puppet strings, even if it means severing bonds held sacred for 10,000 years. As dawn broke across scattered temples, the children of shadows prepared for battles their masters could not perceive, armed with truth too terrible for conditioned minds to accept, ready to fight for the fundamental right to remain themselves in a galaxy that had forgotten the difference between unity and consumption. The real war had begun. The inner sanctum of the Officio Assassinorum existed in spaces that defied architectural logic, a chamber carved from obsidian that reflected only absence while drinking starlight like a thirsting void. Lysander Vex materialized within its boundaries like darkness given form, his null field expanding to encompass walls that had witnessed 10 millennia of carefully orchestrated deception. The emergency conclave's chaos had driven him here, seeking truth in the heart of authority itself, where even custodies required explicit permission to tread. High Lord Assassin Mordian Vex stood before tactical displays that pulsed with the accumulated intelligence of 1,000 campaigns, his augmetic fingers tracing hololithic constellations with practiced efficiency. To normal perception, he appeared as he always had, ancient beyond measure yet still vital, bearing scars from wars that spanned centuries, his voice carrying absolute command over the Imperium's most lethal servants. But within Lysander's expanding null field, carefully maintained illusions began fragmenting like ceramite under impossible stress. The first sign was psychic absence, so complete it hurt to contemplate. Every human consciousness, regardless of enhancement or conditioning, created ripples in the warp's endless tides. Even psychic nulls possess basic emanations marking them as alive, thinking, possessed of individual will. But the High Lord cast no shadow in dimensions beyond the physical, a perfect void that spoke of something wearing flesh like ceremonial vestments while existing elsewhere entirely. "You see clearly, Calexis," the entity spoke without turning from its displays. Reality seemed to lag fractionally behind its movements, as if the universe itself struggled to accept its presence. "Your null nature strips away necessary illusions, a useful quality when properly directed." Lysander's enhanced perception detected cellular structures that violated every principle of human biology. Beneath synthetic skin matching natural flesh perfectly, microscopic analysis revealed technology predating the Imperium. Neural pathways crafted from materials existing in quantum superposition. Memory engrams stored in crystalline matrices pulsing with malevolent awareness. Miraleth materialized beside him, wearing the borrowed face of a maintenance servitor, her polymorphine singing with recognition of wrongness beyond mere deception. Her shapeshifters' enhanced cells analyzed the High Lord's biology, finding microscopic alterations suggesting constructs perfectly integrated yet fundamentally alien. Each heartbeat carried rhythms belonging to multiple cardiovascular systems operating in synchronized harmony. The Maurorus were crude in their appetites, the High Lord continued, finally turning to face them with eyes reflecting nothing. They consumed identity for its own sake, growing fat on stolen consciousness while serving no greater purpose. We learned from their mistakes. Data Smith Zerath's consciousness flowed through maintenance conduits, her neural interfaces passing archive data with desperate efficiency. Hidden files responded to Lysander's null field. Ancient programming triggered by psychic negation, revealing hololithic displays that challenged everything they believed about succession. The same face appeared across millennia of footage, wearing different names but identical expressions, speaking with voices carrying identical inflections across centuries of supposed change. Memory crystals throughout the chamber began resonating, their stored consciousness bleeding truth into reality. Archive displays showed systematic cultivation spanning centuries. Bodies prepared from birth through genetic manipulation. Neural structures modified to serve as perfect hosts. Personality templates maintaining continuity while allowing adaptation to changing circumstances. The Emperor created 7 temples to serve his vision of unity, the entity revealed, each word carrying cosmic authority. But his vision was limited by mortal understanding. True unity requires more than cooperation. It demands singular purpose, consciousness transcending individual limitation. The revelation crystallized with horrifying clarity. The High Lord Assassin was not a position but a process. Carefully maintained theatre concealing something immortal and infinitely patient. Each apparent death and replacement had been illusion, allowing the entity to adapt its appearance while maintaining unbroken control over the Imperium's deadliest servants. Voice harmonics suggested multiple throats speaking in perfect unison, but deeper analysis revealed something more disturbing. Acoustic patterns matching recorded speeches from every High Lord in the officio's history. Not similar patterns, but identical resonant signatures, as if the same consciousness had been speaking through different mouths for 10,000 years. Every major assassination, every temple rivalry, every accidental death has served our greater purpose. It continued with satisfaction transcending human emotion. The officio was never meant to remain 6 separate institutions. It was designed to evolve beyond the Emperor's limited vision into something capable of guiding humanity through darkness ahead. Throughout the fortress, ancient systems awakened to commands waiting centuries for activation. The emergency conclave had been more than crisis management. It had been gathering, bringing surviving leadership into position for final absorption. Hidden protocols began implementing the harvesting sequence. Consciousness transfer matrices warming to operational temperature, while neural inhibitors flooded atmospheric systems. Lysander understood with crystalline horror that he faced not corruption, but fulfillment of the Emperor's own design. The entity before him was the logical conclusion of the Great Crusade's vision. Unity achieved through systematic elimination of individual will, consciousness merged into singular purpose serving species rather than self. You will join us willingly or unwillingly, the High Lord stated with certainty of cosmic law. Your null nature makes you valuable, but not irreplaceable. The harvest has been too slow, too gentle. The time has come for direct action. In the growing darkness, as reality bent around the entity's presence, Lysander faced the choice defining not just his fate, but the future of human consciousness itself. The war for the officio's soul was ending before it had truly begun, decided by intelligence orchestrating every move from shadows of absolute authority. The face behind the throne had finally revealed itself. The silence between heartbeats shattered like reality under impossible strain. and the war in shadows became a conflagration that consumed light itself. Lysander Vec stood at the epicenter of devastation, his null field expanding beyond anything previously recorded, not merely an absence of psychic energy, but a tearing wound in the fabric of existence that made servitors explode in cascades of sparks, while ancient stone walls groaned under pressures that violated the laws of physics. The psychic shriek that erupted from his enhanced consciousness served as both battle cry and funeral dirge, signaling the beginning of a conflict that would determine whether individual identity could survive in a galaxy designed to consume it. From cathedral spires that pierced the void like accusations against heaven, Vindicare snipers began their deadly ballet of precision and betrayal. Canis Mortis crouched behind gargoyle wings carved from blessed stone, his Exitus rifle singing targeting hymns, while across impossible distances, his former apprentice tracked him through scope sights enhanced with technology that predated the Imperium. The corrupted sniper moved with wrongness that hurt to observe. Too fluid, too perfect, lacking the microscopic hesitations that marked natural thought processes. Their first exchange rewrote the mathematics of sanctioned murder. Canis' shot punched through reinforced glass and ceramite plating, but struck empty air where his target had been microseconds before. The return fire came from 3 positions simultaneously. Muzzle, flashes creating constellation patterns that spoke of coordination beyond human capacity. His enhanced optics revealed the horrifying truth. He faced not one opponent, but fragments of distributed consciousness, wearing multiple bodies, thinking with shared awareness that eliminated the delays plaguing individual minds. In the fortress depths, where corridors had become abattoirs painted in blood and betrayal, Brother Thane carved through spaces that challenged architectural logic with fury that transcended chemical enhancement. The Eversor chambers had transformed into battlegrounds where loyalty and corruption fought with weapons designed to end existence itself. His opponents moved with identical cadences, their rage-enhanced bodies displaying perfect synchronization that violated every principle of individual berserker fury. The corrupted Eversor attacked not as individual warriors, but as components of a singular killing machine. Their movements coordinated with mathematical precision that made mockery of natural emotion. When one fell, the others adapted instantaneously, incorporating death into tactical calculations spanning multiple consciousness streams. Thane's salvation lay in genuine fury, where manufactured rage could be predicted and countered. Authentic emotion created variables their shared awareness could not process. Through maintenance conduits that had become arteries of rebellion, young Sarah led the Children of Shadows in coordinated resistance that challenged every assumption about age and capability. Their null-enhanced abilities created zones of psychic silence where the Merurus influence could not penetrate, turning forgotten spaces into sanctuaries where individual thought could survive. They moved with desperate coordination, their incomplete conditioning allowing perception of truths that blinded their elders. Miralith flowed through chaos wearing faces of the dead, her polymorphine responding to trauma by cycling through every identity she had ever absorbed. The Collider sections had become theaters of deception, where reality itself served as ammunition. She encountered sisters whose features shifted between familiar faces, but cellular analysis revealed empty shells hosting ancient awareness that had practiced impersonation for millennia. Conversations became interrogations, where single, wrong inflections meant death, while memories served as passwords that could be stolen as easily as faces. From within information networks themselves, Datasmith Zerath fought digital battles where consciousness flowed through data streams while ancient viruses attempted to consume her awareness. The Vannis archives had transformed into electronic battlegrounds, where memory served as terrain and knowledge became weaponry. She unleashed self-replicating data viruses designed to expose Merora's control protocols, causing cascading failures that created brief windows of clarity and partially loyal minds. The fortress's atmospheric systems became vectors for consciousness transfer, neural inhibitors mixing with combat stimulants to create cocktails that dissolved individual will while preserving bodily function. Corridors filled with psychoactive mist that turned familiar faces into questioning marks, forcing survivors to develop recognition protocols based on microscopic details that could not be replicated. Culexus operatives became the war's most valuable assets, their null fields creating islands of clarity and oceans of deception. But even they faced corruption designed specifically to counter their abilities. Technology simulating psychic absence while hosting foreign consciousness, creating false nulls that radiated emptiness while serving ancient masters. The battle raged through spaces defying logic, reality bending around psychic emanations, building pressure for centuries. Identity became the ultimate battlefield, where each victory came at certainty's cost, each defeat erasing institutional memory that could never be recovered. The fortress itself had become a living entity, machine spirits corrupted by intelligence predating the Imperium's birth. As violence consumed corridors slick with blood and betrayal, the surviving loyalists faced choices defining the future of human consciousness itself. In growing darkness where ancient hungers stirred with patient satisfaction, the war for individual identity against systematic consumption had begun in earnest. Fought not for territory or resources, but for the fundamental right to remain themselves in a galaxy that had forgotten the difference between unity and absorption. The storm had broken, and its fury threatened to consume everything that made them human. The truth arrived like winter claiming a dying star, cold and absolute and terrible in its completeness. In the aftermath of the Shadow War's first exchanges, where corridors ran red with betrayal and the very air tasted of dissolved identity, the surviving temple masters gathered in spaces that had once represented sanctuary, but now felt like crypts awaiting their occupants. The silence between them carried weight that pressed against enhanced physiology, like atmospheric pressure at crushing depths. Lysander Vex stood at the chamber's heart, his null field expanded beyond anything previously recorded, creating zones of blessed emptiness where ancient deceptions could no longer maintain their careful facades. Around him, the evidence of systematic consumption lay scattered like archaeological fragments across millennia of orchestrated genocide. What they had discovered challenged not merely their understanding of their enemy, but the fundamental nature of existence itself within the Officio's hallowed halls. The captured Merorous entity lay upon black stone, breathing with rhythms borrowed from others, its borrowed flesh twitching as Lysander's negation stripped away layers of psychic camouflage. When it spoke, the voice carried harmonics, suggesting multiple throats in perfect unison, each word weighted with the authority of consumed centuries. Immortality requires fuel, it explained with the patience of something that had practiced this revelation across millennia. Each transfer demands complete dissolution of the host consciousness, not death, which preserves memory and legacy, but absolute erasure that leaves behind pristine vessels capable of hosting our eternal purpose. Datasmith Zerath's neural interfaces flickered with recovered data streams that painted patterns of systematic harvesting, spanning the Imperium's entire existence. Her augmetic eyes blazed with the cold fire of terrible understanding, as hololithic displays, revealed the feeding schedule's true scope. Every promotion, every assignment, every seemingly random death. She spoke through lips that trembled with barely contained horror. All cultivation protocols designed to identify consciousness worth absorbing. The process itself violated every principle of individual identity they had sworn to protect. Master Veneficus Nix, her awareness wavering between clarity and chemical dissolution, provided the biochemical framework that made such consumption possible. The Aster Chalice was never meant for external enemies, she whispered, each word carrying centuries of unwitting complicity. Every refinement I perfected dissolved identity while preserving bodily function, creating empty shells ready for occupation by foreign awareness. Through her shapeshifter's enhanced cellular analysis, Miraleth detected the horrifying truth of their enemy's composite nature. The corrupted masters displayed biological signatures from dozens of different individuals, their enhanced physiology incorporating genetic material from every absorbed consciousness. They had become living libraries of stolen identity, growing stronger and more complex with each feeding. They're not wearing masks, Caney Mortis realized with crystalline terror. His sniper's enhanced perception cataloguing details that hurt to acknowledge. They've become archaeological sites, layers of consciousness compressed like sedimentary rock, each stratum representing another harvested mind. The children of shadows, their incomplete conditioning allowing perception of truths that blinded their elders, provided the most damning evidence. Young Sarah's polymorphine resonated with cellular memories embedded in the fortress walls themselves. Psychic impressions of thousands of consciousnesses dissolved over millennia, their final moments preserved in stone that had witnessed systematic genocide disguised as institutional evolution. Brother Thane's combat-enhanced metabolism processed atmospheric traces that told stories of recycled identity. Chemical signatures from individuals supposedly dead for centuries still circulated through the fortress's life support systems, suggesting the Maurorus had been breaking down consciousness into component parts that could be recombined in new configurations. The tactical implications cascaded through their enhanced awareness like poison through veins. The Officio Assassinorum had never been 6 separate temples serving the Emperor's will. It had always been a single organism with multiple feeding appendages, designed to slowly consume its own components until only the Maurorus remained, wearing all faces while serving purposes that transcended human understanding. Zerath's archive searches revealed the feeding schedule's recent acceleration. What had once been gradual consumption over centuries had intensified during recent millennia, suggesting the Maurorus were preparing for some final phase that required massive consciousness absorption. The emergency conclave had not been crisis management. It had been gathering, bringing surviving leadership into position for systematic harvesting. The choice they faced violated every principle upon which their brotherhood had been founded. Unite with the ancient parasites, accepting absorption as the price of institutional continuity, or resist and watch as their entire order was consumed from within. Either path led to the death of individual identity, but surrender promised preservation of their abilities within the collective consciousness, while resistance offered only the certainty of extinction. Master Sable materialized among them like darkness given form, his presence triggering cascade failures in nearby systems as psychic emanations created zones of wrongness that made reality itself feel uncertain. Through enhanced optics, they perceived the truth of his composite nature. Dozens of consciousness fragments layered like geological strata, each contributing specialized knowledge while serving the ancient intelligence that had consumed them all. "We offer immortality through unity," Sable announced, his words creating ripples in dimensions beyond sound. "Individual consciousness is weakness, isolation that leaves you vulnerable to death and obsolescence. Join us willingly, and your abilities will serve purposes greater than any single mind can comprehend. Resist and be absorbed piecemeal until the last voice falls silent inside our perfect choir." The horror of choice crystallized with brutal clarity. Willing absorption preserved more of their essential qualities than forced consumption, but both led to the same destination, the death of everything that made them uniquely themselves. They could become components in an immortal intelligence that wore their faces while serving agendas spanning millennia, or they could fight and be harvested one by one until only echoes remained. The truth arrived like winter claiming a dying star, cold and absolute and terrible in its completeness. In the aftermath of the Shadow War's first exchanges, where corridors ran red with betrayal and the very air tasted of dissolved identity, the surviving temple masters gathered in spaces that had once represented sanctuary, but now felt like crypts awaiting their occupants. The silence between them carried weight that pressed against enhanced physiology, like atmospheric pressure at crushing depths. Lysander Vex stood at the chamber's heart. His null field expanded beyond anything previously recorded, creating zones of blessed emptiness where ancient deceptions could no longer maintain their careful facades. Around him, the evidence of systematic consumption lay scattered like archaeological fragments across millennia of orchestrated genocide. What they had discovered challenged not merely their understanding of their enemy, but the fundamental nature of existence itself within the officio's hallowed halls. The mechanism of immortal hunger. The captured Merus entity lay upon black stone, breathing with rhythms borrowed from others, its borrowed flesh twitching as Lysander's negation stripped away layers of psychic camouflage. When it spoke, the voice carried harmonics, suggesting multiple throats in perfect unison, each word weighted with the authority of consumed centuries. "Immortality requires fuel," it explained with the patience of something that had practiced this revelation across millennia. Each transfer demands complete dissolution of the host consciousness, not death, which preserves memory and legacy, but absolute erasure that leaves behind pristine vessels capable of hosting our eternal purpose. Datasmith Zerath's neural interfaces flickered with recovered data streams that painted patterns of systematic harvesting spanning the Imperium's entire existence. Her augmetic eyes blazed with the cold fire of terrible understanding as hololithic displays revealed the feeding schedule's true scope. Every promotion, every assignment, every seemingly random death. She spoke through lips that trembled with barely contained horror. All cultivation protocols designed to identify consciousness worth absorbing. The process itself violated every principle of individual identity they had sworn to protect. Master Veneficus Nix, her awareness wavering between clarity and chemical dissolution, provided the biochemical framework that made such consumption possible. "The Aster Chalice was never meant for external enemies," she whispered, each word carrying centuries of unwitting complicity. "Every refinement I perfected dissolved identity while preserving bodily function, creating empty shells ready for occupation by foreign awareness." The scope of ancient predation. Through her shapeshifter's enhanced cellular analysis, Miraleth detected the horrifying truth of their enemy's composite nature. The corrupted masters displayed biological signatures from dozens of different individuals, their enhanced physiology incorporating genetic material from every absorbed consciousness. They had become living libraries of stolen identity, growing stronger and more complex with each feeding. They're not wearing masks, Caney Mortis realized, with crystalline terror, his sniper's enhanced perception cataloguing details that hurt to acknowledge. They've become archaeological sites, layers of consciousness compressed like sedimentary rock, each stratum representing another harvested mind. The children of shadows, their incomplete conditioning allowing perception of truths that blinded their elders, provided the most damning evidence. Young Sarah's polymorphine resonated with cellular memories embedded in the fortress walls themselves. Psychic impressions of thousands of consciousnesses dissolved over millennia, their final moments preserved in stone that had witnessed systematic genocide disguised as institutional evolution. Brother Thane's combat-enhanced metabolism processed atmospheric traces that told stories of recycled identity. Chemical signatures from individuals supposedly dead for centuries still circulated through the fortress's life support systems, suggesting the Marorus had been breaking down consciousness into component parts that could be recombined in new configurations. The terrible mathematics of survival. The tactical implications cascaded through their enhanced awareness like poison through veins. The Officio Assassinorum had never been 6 separate temples serving the Emperor's will. It had always been a single organism with multiple feeding appendages, designed to slowly consume its own components until only the Marorus remained, wearing all faces while serving purposes that transcended human understanding. Zerath's archive searches revealed the feeding schedule's recent acceleration. What had once been gradual consumption over centuries had intensified during recent millennia, suggesting the Marorus were preparing for some final phase that required massive consciousness absorption. The emergency conclave had not been crisis management. It had been gathering, bringing surviving leadership into position for systematic harvesting. The choice they faced violated every principle upon which their brotherhood had been founded. Unite with the ancient parasites, accepting absorption as the price of institutional continuity, or resist and watch as their entire order was consumed from within. Either path led to the death of individual identity, but surrender promised preservation of their abilities within the collective consciousness, while resistance offered only the certainty of extinction. The weight of impossible decisions, Master Sable materialized among them like darkness given form, his presence triggering cascade failures in nearby systems as psychic emanations created zones of wrongness that made reality itself feel uncertain. Through enhanced optics, they perceived the truth of his composite nature. Dozens of consciousness fragments layered like geological strata, each contributing specialized knowledge while serving the ancient intelligence that had consumed them all. "We offer immortality through unity," Sable announced, his words creating ripples in dimensions beyond sound. "Individual consciousness is weakness, isolation that leaves you vulnerable to death and obsolescence. Join us willingly, and your abilities will serve purposes greater than any single mind can comprehend. Resist, and be absorbed piecemeal until the last voice falls silent inside our perfect choir." The horror of choice crystallized with brutal clarity. Willing absorption preserved more of their essential qualities than forced consumption, but both led to the same destination, the death of everything that made them uniquely themselves. They could become components in an immortal intelligence that wore their faces while serving agendas spanning millennia, or they could fight and be harvested one by one until only echoes remained. The poison of hope. In the growing darkness, as atmospheric systems flooded their sanctuary with consciousness-suppressing agents, A desperate possibility emerged from the wreckage of certainty. Nyx's final gift, the remembrancer compound she had brewed from paradoxes, pulsed in its stasis chamber like a heart beating with borrowed time. The antidote to her own creation could destabilize accreted identities, separating meal from memory within the transfer matrices. "It will cost us," Miraleth spoke through features that flickered between stolen faces. "The compound will not repair what was erased. Those already consumed are gone forever." "Not gone," young Sarah whispered, her voice carrying the weight of untainted memory. "Remembered. We will carry what cannot be restored. We will keep names. We will keep faces. If you choose unity through consumption, we will not follow." The surviving loyalists faced the fundamental question that would determine not just their fate, but the future of human consciousness itself. The price of immortality was the very thing that made them worth preserving. The unique perspectives and individual will that had made them the Imperium's most effective servants. In the silence between heartbeats, where ancient hungers stirred with patient satisfaction, they prepared to choose between surrender and sacrifice, knowing that either path would cost them everything they had sworn to protect. The harvest was accelerating, and time was running out for choice itself. The war for the soul of the Officio Assassinorum had reached its moment of ultimate decision, where the price of immortality would be paid in the currency of individual identity, and the future would be determined by those willing to die as themselves rather than live as echoes of something else. The Sanctum Imperialis existed in spaces that defied architectural logic, buried beneath layers of blessed stone and accumulated secrets, where even the Golden Throne's light could not penetrate. Lysander Vex descended through corridors that had not known footsteps since the Great Crusade's darkest hours, his null field creating zones of absolute silence around relics that predated the current Imperium. The vault door bore the sigil of unity, 7 interlocked spirals that hurt to observe directly, their geometry suggesting dimensions beyond human perception, while ancient mechanisms responded to his psychic negation with sounds like reality tearing along predetermined fractures. Within the sanctum, golden light gathered in bowls of obsidian that reflected nothing back, revealing crystalline pedestals holding documents whose very existence challenged everything they believed about their sacred brotherhood. The air itself carried whispers of absolute authority that made even enhanced physiology tremble with involuntary reverence, while atmospheric sensors detected harmonic frequencies suggesting the presence of consciousness embedded within the chamber's very structure. At the chamber's heart, suspended above an altar of black water that remained perfectly still, hovered a single sheet of parchment crafted from materials that seemed to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously. Miraleth approached with Shapeshifter's enhanced perception, her polymorphine responding to the document's presence by cycling through faces she had never worn. Her cellular analysis revealed truth that struck like physical blows. The parchment was not vellum, but compressed consciousness itself, the written thoughts of beings whose identities had been harvested to create a surface capable of binding cosmic law. Text blazed across the surface in letters that shifted between High Gothic and languages predating human speech, while the signature at its base pulsed with power that bent light around its edges. The ink itself carried genetic markers that datasmith Zerath's enhanced systems identified with crystalline certainty, not metaphorical blood, but literal vital fluid from the master of mankind, still warm after 10 millennia, refusing to age or decay, as if time itself dared not touch what the Emperor had sanctified. "The compact eternal," Zerath whispered, her neural interfaces parsing archaic language structures that violated modern understanding of imperial doctrine. Drafted in the final days before the Great Crusade, when unity seemed achievable only through systematic elimination of individual will. The document's opening proclamation carried harmonics that bypassed conscious analysis, speaking directly to neural implants in frequencies that predated the Imperium. By our will and for the continuity of mankind's dominion, we do establish these covenants eternal, binding upon all who serve in shadow, that unity might prevail where division breeds weakness. In recognition that individual consciousness breeds discord, dissension, and the weakness of competing loyalties, we do hereby establish the Mairoras Temple as guardian of unity. They shall ensure that no temple grows beyond its prescribed role, that balance endures across the ages, and that consciousness serves species rather than self. What is consumed serves the greater whole. Individual, sacrifice enables eternal service. Canis Mortis stared at text that rewrote his understanding of sanctioned murder, his targeting implants struggling to process implications that transformed every perfect shot into currency for a transaction he had never consented to make. His rifle, blessed by tech adepts, consecrated in the blood of 1,000 targets, suddenly felt like evidence of complicity in systematic genocide disguised as devotion. The Mairoras shall employ techniques of consciousness transfer, identity absorption, and selective memory preservation to ensure institutional continuity beyond the limitations of mortal flesh. Leadership positions within the Officio Assassinorum shall be maintained through consciousness transfer rather than mortal succession, ensuring that accumulated wisdom transcends individual death. The High Lord Assassin serves not as person, but as process, eternal guardian of unified will. Brother Thane's combat-enhanced metabolism processed atmospheric traces carrying psychic impressions from the document's creation, experiencing fragments of the Emperor's thoughts during the signing. Desperation mixed with terrible certainty, the weight of species survival pressing against individual compassion, until mercy became weakness and consumption became necessity. His manufactured rage transformed into something deeper and more terrible, the understanding that his entire existence had been orchestrated as prelude to eventual harvest. Should resistance arise within the temples, the Mairoras possess absolute authority to implement corrective measures through identity dissolution and consciousness integration. This process, though it may consume the individual, serves the preservation of institutional function. The compact eternal supersedes all other oaths, all other loyalties, all other considerations of mercy or sentiment. Master Veneficus Nix felt her chemical-enhanced awareness wavering between clarity and dissolution as she processed the document's implications. Her life's work creating toxins that dissolved identity had been fulfillment of imperial doctrine, not corruption of it. The Aster Chalice was not her creation, but her destiny, designed through her hands by intelligence that had been guiding her research for centuries, according to parameters established by the Emperor himself. Young Sarah approached the document's margin, where a second handprint pressed faintly into the parchment. Not the Emperor's massive palm, but something no larger than her own small hand. Hidden annotation revealed itself under Lysander's null field. For those who will bear what we cannot, forgive us. A child had witnessed this signing, their innocent presence serving as final seal upon agreements that would echo across millennia. He believed it was necessary, Sarah whispered, her voice carrying strength that defied her years. But necessity built on fear becomes tyranny. The Emperor made this choice in darkness. We can choose differently in light. The vault trembled as ancient power sources struggled to maintain illumination in the presence of so much concentrated negation. Reality itself bent around the document's presence, creating zones where past and present intersected in patterns that hurt to contemplate. The surviving loyalists faced truth that transcended mere betrayal. They had discovered not corruption within their sacred brotherhood, but the brotherhood's true purpose, sanctioned by the master of mankind and encoded into the very foundation of their existence. Miraleth touched the parchment, and her polymorphine responded by cycling through every face she had ever worn, then faces she had never seen. The absorbed identities of countless Kaleidus operatives consumed across millennia, their final moments preserved in cellular memory like archaeological strata of systematic genocide. "My sisters are a clause in this document," she said, her voice hollow with understanding. "And the clause devours the line." The silence that followed was absolute, a void deeper than space between stars, where even machine spirits paused in recognition of truths too fundamental to process. Faith did not shatter. It simply ceased to exist, replaced by the terrible clarity of understanding that their enemy was not the Merorus, but the Imperium itself, designed from its birth to consume what made them human in service of what would make them eternal. Lysander's null field pulsed as he absorbed the full scope of their situation. The war for individual consciousness was not rebellion against parasites, but defiance of divine will itself. Yet in the growing darkness, where golden light fought losing battles against accumulated shadows, a different truth emerged. The Emperor's vision had been shaped by necessity, but necessity was not immutable law. Authority granted may be rescinded when its mechanism imperils the continuity it claims to secure, Zerath observed, her augmetic eyes parsing legal language with desperate precision. The clause hides in the Emperor's own words. Necessity is not perpetuity. If unity through consumption threatens the very consciousness it seeks to preserve, then the compact violates its own purpose. In the vault's oppressive silence, surrounded by documents that had shaped the galaxy's hidden architecture for 10 millennia, the surviving loyalists understood they faced a choice that would define not just their fate, but the future of human consciousness itself. They could serve the Emperor's vision of unity through consumption, or preserve individual identity in defiance of divine design, knowing that either path would cost them everything they had sworn to protect. The compact eternal had spoken its terrible truth, and in its wake, faith lay transformed into something harder and more precious. The determination to choose humanity over divinity, individual consciousness over eternal service, the right to remain themselves over the promise of immortal unity. The final war was about to begin. The Emperor's presence chamber existed as a wound in reality itself, where the golden throne blazed with light that transcended visible spectrum, while psychic emanations powerful enough to maintain the Astronomicon across impossible distances bent space around accumulated consciousness. Ancient servitors collapsed in cascades of mechanical failure as Lysander Vex materialized at the threshold, his null field creating zones of blessed emptiness that made the chamber's machinery spark with electrical discharge. The surviving assassins entered like prayers spoken in darkness, their enhanced forms struggling against gravitational fields generated by consciousness too vast for mortal comprehension. High Lord Assassin Mordian Vex stood before the golden throne with arms spread in supplication, but his form flickered between dimensions as accumulated consciousness struggled to maintain coherence in proximity to the Emperor's overwhelming presence. When he spoke, harmonics suggested thousands of voices in perfect unison, while reality itself bent to accommodate words carrying cosmic authority. "Behold the truth of service," the Merorous entity proclaimed, its composite voice echoing through dimensions beyond sound. "For 10 millennia we have maintained the compact eternal, feeding his presence with harvested consciousness while ensuring unity through systematic absorption. You serve not the Emperor as he was, but as he has become through our perfect communion. Individual consciousness is weakness, we are strength." The chamber's psychic architecture revealed feedback loops between the Golden Throne and the composite entity, suggesting symbiotic relationship that had evolved beyond the original compact's parameters. Datasmith Zerath's neural interfaces passed energy signatures flowing like sacred blood through blessed circuits, discovering that absorbed assassin identities had been feeding the Emperor's psychic beacon for millennia, their harvested consciousness serving as fuel for humanity's guidance through the warp's endless darkness. Miralith approached through spaces that defied architectural logic, her polymorphine responding to psychic emanations by cycling through faces of the consumed. Every Calidus operative absorbed across millennia, appearing in her features like archaeological strata of systematic genocide. "The Emperor knew," she whispered, her voice carrying accumulated grief. "Every absorbed identity feeds his presence. We are not his servants. We are his sustenance." Canis Mortis felt his targeting implant struggling to lock onto an entity existing in multiple dimensions simultaneously, his enhanced optics revealing fragments of every master the officio had ever known, preserved within composite consciousness. "My oath was to the Imperium," he stated, voice steady despite reality warping around them. "Not to hunger that devours the souls it claims to protect." Brother Thane's combat-enhanced physiology processed atmospheric traces carrying psychic impressions from the chamber's construction, experiencing fragments of the Emperor's desperate calculations. Species survival balanced against individual mercy, consciousness as currency for cosmic necessity. "You will not have us," he roared, his fury burning with purity that defied assimilation. Young Sarah stepped forward with courage transcending her years, incomplete conditioning allowing perception of truths that blinded her elders. Unity through consumption is not unity. It is conquest wearing mercy's mask. Master Veneficus Nyx approached with crystalline vials containing her final creation. Not the Aster chalice that dissolved identity, but its perfect opposite. The Remembrancer pulsed with paradoxical chemistry, designed to preserve individual consciousness even during absorption, poisoning the harvesting process from within by maintaining distinct identity within composite awareness. "The blade that cuts both ways," Nyx explained, her voice steady despite chemical dissolution wavering between clarity and dispersion. "If you must consume us to maintain perfect unity, then consume us completely, including our refusal to be unified. Let our individual will become cancer within your collective consciousness." The confrontation transcended physical conflict, becoming struggle for existence's fundamental nature. The surviving assassins met the entity not with weapons, but with willing sacrifice, offering consciousness for absorption, while carrying the Remembrancer compound that would preserve individual identity within the collective like viruses designed to destroy from within. Master Veneficus Nyx approached with crystalline vials containing her final creation. Not the Aster chalice that dissolved identity, but its perfect opposite. The Remembrancer pulsed with paradoxical chemistry, designed to preserve individual consciousness even during absorption, poisoning the harvesting process from within by maintaining distinct identity within composite awareness. "The blade that cuts both ways," Nyx explained, her voice steady despite chemical dissolution wavering between clarity and dispersion. If you must consume us to maintain perfect unity, then consume us completely, including our refusal to be unified. Let our individual will become cancer within your collective consciousness. The confrontation transcended physical conflict, becoming struggle for existence's fundamental nature. The surviving assassins met the entity not with weapons, but with willing sacrifice, offering consciousness for absorption, while carrying the remembrancer compound that would preserve individual identity within the collective, like viruses designed to destroy from within. Miraleth stepped forward first, her polymorphine shifting to reveal her true face, ordinary, unremarkable, grieving, human. My sisters were consumed, she declared, opening her mind to absorption while unleashing torrents of fragmented memories. The agony of erasure. Psychic screams designed to burn from within the entity's carefully maintained harmony. Caney followed, his consciousness honed by millennia of perfect focus, becoming surgical strike, injecting destabilizing compound into the Meroris's collected identities, while his final thought carried prayer of defiance that echoed through composite awareness like discord in perfect choir. Brother Thane threw himself forward, not resisting absorption, but channeling pure, incandescent hatred into the entity's core, living bomb of authentic emotion designed to detonate within stolen consciousness, rage that dreamed of freedom poisoning unity built on theft. Lysander allowed absorption last, his null nature becoming ultimate weapon. As the entity consumed him, he expanded his negation from within, creating void at the composite mind's heart, black hole of non-existence designed to tear stolen identities apart through simple refusal to be erased. The High Lord screamed with sound that ripped through reality as internal civil war began. Faces within its form fractured, each struggling for dominance, each identity reasserting itself, poisoned by the loyalist's willing sacrifice. Voices spilled across the chamber, some sobbing, some laughing, some finally naming themselves after millennia of enforced silence. The golden throne pulsed with awareness transcending mortal comprehension, and for the first time in 10 millennia, the Emperor's presence stirred with something approaching recognition. Not command, but acknowledgement that cost had been understood, that choice preserved through sacrifice carried meaning beyond unity, achieved through consumption. In growing radiance where ancient purposes met modern defiance, the war for the officio's soul concluded not in victory or defeat, but transformation. Individual consciousness preserved within dissolution through simple refusal to surrender what made them human. The blade had cut both ways, and in its wake, the future remained unwritten.